Hi everyone, my name is Anwen and today we're going to be looking at how to write a hard news story for journalism. While every story is unique in its content and facts, there are basic principles that can be applied to all traditional news stories. These fundamentals help us to put a news story together quickly while still ensuring consistency and accuracy. They also ensure that the facts are placed in the correct order, which helps to lead the reader through the story and allows them to gain as much knowledge as possible. When you hear about an event, whether it's a plane crash, a drought, or that your favorite rugby player sustained an injury, the first thing that you do is ask questions. By asking these questions, you deepen your understanding of an event, as well as quench your thirst for knowledge. When we are left with questions that are unanswered, we are often frustrated or turn to another source of information that will help us fill in the blanks and complete the story. The reader expects the journalist to be the ones to answer these important questions, which are commonly referred to as the 5 W's and H. These are who, what, when, where, why, and how. If these questions are answered, then the readers should have a full understanding of the events that have taken place. Firstly, who? This question refers to those involved in the news story. In other words, who the action is about. Asking the question of who is involved ensures that everyone who has relevance in the story is named, with an explanation of their link to the story. The involved parties could include a hijacking victim, the alleged murderer, family members, and so on. The reason we ask this question is because the reader needs to know who the focus of the story is and how this is relevant or could impact their lives. If the who is not present, the readers will be left with more questions than answers. Next is what. The reader needs to know what event has taken place or what has actually happened. Your readers will want to know if your story is about a suspected rape, a strike, a natural disaster, and so on. People will only read stories that have relevance to them and covers topics that they find interesting. This question helps the reader to understand the importance of the story to them, what the focus of the story actually is, why the story is being covered, and whether or not the reader wants to spend time reading the full story. The next question that needs to be answered is when. As we have learned, newspaper articles must be new and up to date. Old information is not news unless there has been a development in the story. The when question puts the story on a timeline. Most often, journalists state the day the event took place, but you can also be a bit more specific about the time of day. A good example of when this question is imperative would be when reporting on an increase in crimes in the area. Are you talking about last month, or are you talking about the last 5 years? Readers need context. Answering this question is very important as it also helps the readers to know if the story will have a direct impact on them right now. People need to know where your event is taking place. As we know, news is global, so we need to know where events are taking place to understand not only the proximity of events, but also how great the impact of the event will be on a global scale. If you start off a story with a terrorist attack has taken place and has left scores injured and 100 dead, and you do not state where the terrorist attack took place, you will have very confused and upset readers. Readers want to know their own physical or emotional proximity to an event. By giving them a location, they will know if it is going to directly impact them, such as with load shedding, or if it's going to impact people that they know halfway across the world. Next is why. For some stories, this question may be impossible to answer. This question may only be answerable later with follow-up stories, such as in a murder case. Generally, however, people want to know why something has happened. When changes are made in government, people question these actions and do not take the information at face value. In some instances, people ask why because they are curious and feel they have a right to know why something has happened if it impacts them as well as those around them. Finally, how. This question is sometimes one of the more difficult questions to answer, depending on the content of a story. If you are discussing a brutal murder, it is not in the reader's best interest to know the exact details of the murder. Journalists often have to be careful when answering this question and take into account whether divulging details may result in an unfair trial or place the journalist in contempt of court. Always remember to take the families into consideration. Once you have your 5 W's and H, the next step is crafting the hook. Every day, newspapers are filled with many different articles, and they're all competing for the reader's attention. One way to increase the readability of a news story is to craft a good hook. A hook is designed to draw the reader into the story quickly and keep them engaged. A hook can be an interesting angle or simply the placement of facts in a way that grabs the attention of the reader. A hook can be used to pose a question to intrigue the reader, which will be answered in the news story. If your story discusses something new or unusual, you can hint to this exciting new information in the hook, without revealing all of the information right at the beginning. One of the easiest ways for the readers to know if a story has relevance to them is by reading the hook. It gives them just enough information to help the reader decide whether or not the story is worth spending time on. Always consider your readers, as they are the focus of every story you write. The following are some examples of interesting hooks. It took 3,000 deaths for them to listen to us. How many more deaths will there have to be for them to take us seriously? Some see a plastic straw as a harmless piece of plastic, but what many do not realize is that over 1,000 turtles are killed every year because of plastic waste in the oceans globally. Once your hook has been developed, your next stage is crafting your news lead. While there is some overlap between hooks and leads, the lead is the introduction to your news story, which presents the most important facts, namely your 5 W's and H, in a well-structured, interesting way. The lead makes the reader want to read on, but does not give away everything and makes the rest of the story redundant. The factors that will influence your lead are who you are writing for, your audience, and what you know before you have to get your story to print. When writing a lead, you need to include as many of the 5 W's and H as possible without overloading your reader. Your lead must be only 25 to 40 words in length. There are 5 different types of leads which you're able to use for your hard news story. The first is summative. This is one of the more traditional types of leads, as it simply summarizes the events that have taken place. This lead is often used for breaking news and provides the most important facts at the start. The next is your anecdotal lead. Starting off a news story with a smaller anecdotal story can work well to grab the reader's attention. Anecdotes can bring a story to life and transport the reader directly into the action. It gives the audience something to connect to. What is important to remember is there must be a direct link between the anecdote and main story for the piece to make sense. Your descriptive lead describes a person, place, or event to give context to a news story. It helps to take the readers to where the event is taking place. This type of lead works well for newspaper features, as it helps the reader feel involved in the event. Your immediate identification lead is used when someone of importance is featured in the story. People will be more interested in a story when famous people are involved. This also means that the story will likely feature towards the start of the newspaper. The delayed identification lead, on the other hand, can be used when the actions or results of the event are more important than the people involved. When this happens, you can delay the identification of those involved in the event and focus more on what took place within the given situation. Now that you've created your lead, it is time to choose the correct structure for writing your hard news story. There are 4 different structures which we are going to focus on, which you are able to use. The first structure is the inverted pyramid. This is one of the most commonly used structures in journalism. The inverted pyramid is an upside-down triangle structure in which the facts of the news story are presented from the most important information at the top to the least important information at the bottom. The inverted pyramid structure greatly improves the efficiency of sub-editing, as sub-editors who are not present when the stories are written know that they can edit from the bottom up without affecting the integrity of the story or losing important facts. It is important to understand that stories that use the inverted pyramid approach do not have actual conclusions, as these stories simply trail off to the less significant facts and details. The story's conclusion is actually already contained in the lead. Summing up the focus of the story happens at the beginning of the article, so that the readers do not have to wait until the end to have all the facts. Summing up the focus of the story happens at the beginning of the article, so the readers do not have to wait until the end to have all the facts. This story structure works in the favor of the reader. The news is written so that the reader can stop reading when they have satisfied their curiosity without worrying that they have missed something relevant. This way, the readers are able to gain knowledge quickly without having to sift through entire news stories. The hourglass structure builds on the foundations of the inverted pyramid. It starts with the most crucial information at the top, but after a few paragraphs, it changes direction and develops into a narrative, usually with the facts in sequential order. For readers pressed for time, they are able to read the first half of the hourglass story, gain the basic understanding of the story, and be able to move on. For readers who are invested in the story and want to know more, it undergoes a transition and bridges the first half of the story to the second, more narrative part of the story. The bottom allows the writer to tell a chronological narrative complete with detailed dialogue and background information. The bottom allows a writer to tell a chronological narrative complete with detailed dialogue and background information. It is here that there is more of a discussion and analysis about the details given in the first half of the story. The result of the structure is that it produces stories that are not only longer in length, but have more depth and debate. This gives the reader more information to work with, and often this leads to a far greater understanding of the events. Made popular by the Wall Street Journal, the diamond structure lends itself to incorporating human voices into a story. The focus of the diamond structure is about balancing facts along with the personal experience of a focal character. This brings a human interest element to the story. The structure is normally started with an anecdote that introduces the character, whose experiences outline what the whole story is about. In this way, the human interest elements are immediately incorporated, and the focal character is introduced to the audience early, allowing the reader to connect with the focal character. Once this is done, a nut graph is included. A nut graph is a paragraph that explains to the audience in a nutshell what the story is about and why the story is considered news. It is the core information that also tells the reader why the story is important and why they should spend their time reading the entire story. Once this is done, the body of the story is written. This is where the larger issues are discussed, and there is an intertwining of personal and factual information. Finally, attention is returned to the original focal character, who is able to sum up the story and add some final emotional context, which can linger with the reader long after they have read the story. What is important to remember with the diamond structure is to have a good balance of emotion and facts. The champagne glass is the most commonly used structure for presenting facts in a chronological order. The start of the champagne glass structure is very similar to the inverted pyramid, starting with the 5 W's in H, outlining the focus of the story, and giving the reader the most important facts first to inform them of what the story is about in a short space of time. Once these important facts are covered, the story moves into the transition stage of the structure, which helps to link the inverted pyramid to the chronological section of the news story. Once the focus of the story is outlined and the major points are covered, the story transitions into the stem stage, where the events are laid out in chronological order. For some stories, such as those dealing with facts and statistics, the best way for the facts to be presented is in a chronological order. Finally, the story ends off with a kicker. This is a punchy or memorable ending that rewards the reader for sticking with the story to the end. It can be a powerful quote, an emotional scene, or even a provocative question. Now that you have learned the 4 different structures which you can use for writing your hard news stories, you have to think about which structure is correct for your piece of writing. It is important to know that each story you produce will suit a different writing structure. And in some instances, more than one structure will suit the information you have. The structure that you choose is dependent on what you're trying to achieve. If you want to impart straight facts, then you've got to go with the inverted pyramid. Or if you're trying to give a more human interest-based story, then maybe the diamond structure. Always remember that if you start writing using one structure and then find that the story is not working or lacks flow, then you can try one of the other structures. This may help formulate your facts in a more reader-friendly format. If you force a story in a particular structure that's not working, the chances are your readers will feel your frustration, and instead of reading your story, they'll move on to the next one that is easier to read. And that's it for today, everyone. I hope this video has helped you to gain some further understanding on how to write a hard news story for journalism.